Why does a narcissist come back after no contact? You've finally stopped texting. You've stopped checking their social media. You've stopped asking why they disappeared. You've stopped trying to convince them to communicate. And slowly, you're beginning to rebuild your life. Then suddenly, they appear again. A message, a phone call, hey, how have you been? Maybe they say they miss you. Maybe they remind you of a beautiful memory you shared. Maybe they suddenly sound like the person you wished they had been all along. And for a moment, you may wonder, did they finally realize what they lost? But before you answer that question, there's something important you need to understand. A person's return is not proof of transformation. Someone can come back without changing. Someone can miss your presence without being capable of giving you a healthy relationship. And someone can want access to you without being willing to take responsibility for what happened. So today, we're going to explore why someone with strong narcissistic traits may come back after no contact, and how to tell the difference between genuine change and simply restarting the same cycle. When you were constantly available, they knew where you stood. They knew you cared. They knew you might respond. They knew you were emotionally invested, but no contact changes that certainty. Suddenly, they don't know what you're thinking. They don't know whether you still miss them. They don't know whether you're waiting for them. And they don't know whether you've started moving on. That uncertainty can become significant, because the person who once felt certain about your availability may now be confronted with the possibility that your attention is no longer guaranteed. And that's why the first thing to understand is this. No contact doesn't magically change another person. It changes your participation in the relationship dynamic. You stop feeding the cycle. You stop explaining. You stop chasing. You stop reacting. And sometimes, that absence becomes noticeable. Think about what access means. Access means being able to contact someone whenever you want. Access means knowing they will probably answer. Access means knowing that if you become distant, they may come looking for you. When that access disappears, the dynamic can change. They may suddenly wonder, why aren't they responding? Are they really done? Have they moved on? Are they talking to someone else? Why aren't they trying to get me back? The important thing is that their curiosity doesn't automatically mean love. It may simply mean that something familiar has changed. That's why you shouldn't immediately interpret their return as evidence that they've suddenly developed a deeper understanding of your value. Instead, look at the behavior that follows the return. Relationships can provide emotional validation, attention, admiration, reassurance, companionship. For someone who relies heavily on external validation, losing a consistent source of attention can be uncomfortable. And this can explain why someone may reach out after a period of silence. They may miss how you made them feel. They may miss having someone who listened, someone who responded, someone who admired them, someone who was emotionally available. But there's an important distinction. Missing what you provided is not necessarily the same as missing you as a whole person. That's a difficult distinction. Because hearing, "I miss you," can feel powerful. But ask, what exactly do they miss? Do they miss your personality, your companionship, your shared life? Or do they miss the attention, reassurance, and emotional availability they received from you? Their behavior after reconnecting can help answer that question. Sometimes, the first contact isn't dramatic. It's extremely simple. "Hey, how are you? I was thinking about you. I saw something that reminded me of you." These messages may appear innocent, and they might be, but they can also function as a test. The person may simply want to know, do I still have access to this person? And your response can provide the answer. If you immediately respond with excitement, explain how much you've missed them, and reopen the entire relationship, the old dynamic may return very quickly. That's why you don't have to make an immediate decision. You can observe, you can slow down, you can ask questions, and most importantly, you can look at actions rather than words. You've probably heard the term hoovering in discussions about narcissistic relationships. It describes attempts to pull someone back into a relationship or interaction after distance or separation. It can take many forms: a simple message, an apology, a declaration of love, a sudden crisis, a nostalgic memory. a promise to change, a compliment, or even something designed to make you feel guilty. The common element is that the person is attempting to reopen communication. But reopening communication doesn't automatically mean the underlying problems have been resolved. That's the critical point. Contact is not change. An apology is not necessarily change. A promise is not necessarily change. Change is demonstrated through consistent behavior over time. This is one of the most confusing parts. Maybe they were dismissive before. Maybe they ignored your feelings. Maybe they constantly criticized you. Then suddenly, they're gentle, they're affectionate, they're patient, they're telling you everything you wanted to hear. And you may think, this is the person I always wanted. But slow down. Don't evaluate a relationship based on someone's best behavior during the first few days after they return. Watch what happens when you disagree. Watch what happens when you establish a boundary. Watch what happens when you say no. Watch what happens when they don't get what they want. That's where you learn much more about someone's relational behavior, because anyone can behave beautifully when they're trying to regain access. The question is, can they behave respectfully when they no longer need to convince you? Another common way someone may reconnect is through nostalgia. They remind you of your first date, your favorite restaurant, a trip, a private joke, a beautiful moment you shared. And suddenly, you aren't thinking about the difficult months anymore. You're thinking about the beginning, the version of the relationship that felt exciting, safe, romantic, hopeful. That's why nostalgia can be powerful. But remember, a beautiful memory doesn't erase a painful pattern. You can appreciate the good moments and still acknowledge that the relationship wasn't healthy. You don't have to pretend that everything was terrible, and you don't have to pretend that everything was wonderful. You can hold both truths at the same time. Sometimes the attempt to reconnect isn't gentle. It may involve jealousy, a provocative comment, a message designed to make you angry, something that reminds you of another person, something that makes you want to defend yourself. Why? Because anger is still engagement. If you respond emotionally, the connection has been reopened. And this is why emotional control matters. You don't have to answer every provocation. You don't have to defend your entire history. You don't have to prove that you were the good person. And you don't have to win an argument. Sometimes the healthiest response is simply to maintain your boundary. This is where you need to be especially careful. They may say, "I've changed. I understand now. I know I hurt you. I'll never do that again." And perhaps they genuinely mean it. People can change, but genuine change requires more than words. Look for accountability. Do they acknowledge what they did without blaming you? Consistency. Do they behave differently over time? Respect. Do they respect your boundaries even when they don't like them? Responsibility. Can they admit mistakes without turning themselves into the victim? Patience. Are they willing to rebuild trust gradually rather than demanding immediate access? These are far more meaningful than a dramatic declaration of love. This is perhaps the most important point in the entire video. Someone can want you back without wanting to change. They may want the relationship benefits, the attention, the companionship, the emotional support, the familiarity, the validation, the comfort. But a healthy relationship requires something more. It requires mutual respect, communication, accountability, boundaries, reciprocity, and emotional safety. So don't ask only, "Do they want me back?" Ask, "What kind of relationship are they offering me if I let them back in?" That's a much better question. If you're considering responding to someone who has returned, don't focus only on how strongly you feel. Look for evidence. Have they acknowledged specific behavior? Have they stopped blaming you? Have they changed the way they communicate? Do they respect your boundaries? Are they consistent when you disagree? Do they accept no? Do they give you space? Are they willing to rebuild trust slowly? And perhaps most importantly, does the relationship feel healthier over time? Not for 2 days, not for 1 week, but consistently. Because genuine change doesn't need to be constantly announced. You can see it. You can experience it. You don't have to be persuaded that it's happening. There is no universal answer. Some people decide that no contact is the healthiest option. Others choose limited communication. Others may decide to explore whether genuine change is possible. Your decision should depend on your circumstances, your safety, your boundaries, and the actual behavior you're seeing. But don't respond simply because you feel guilty. Don't respond because you're afraid they'll move on. Don't respond because you're lonely tonight. And don't respond because hearing, "I miss you," temporarily makes you feel valuable. Ask yourself, what would happen if I let this person back into my life exactly as they are today? Not the person you hope they'll become, not the person they promise to become, the person they are today. Would you be comfortable with that? When someone comes back after no contact, it's natural to ask, why did they come back? But there's a better question. Ask, why do I want them back? Do you miss them? Do you miss the relationship? Do you miss the good memories? Do you miss being wanted? Are you hoping they will finally give you the closure you never received? Are you hoping this time will be different? There is no shame in having those feelings. But understanding them can prevent you from confusing emotional longing with evidence that the relationship is healthy. One of the biggest mistakes people make after no contact is believing that the return itself is the reward. They think, they came back, so I won. But this isn't a competition. You don't win because someone who ignored you eventually sends a message. You win when you regain control over your own decisions. You win when you stop accepting behavior that destroys your peace. You win when you no longer need someone else's attention to feel valuable. And you win when you can see someone's return clearly without immediately losing yourself in it. So, why might a narcissist come back after no contact? They may notice that your attention is gone. They may miss the validation you provided. They may become curious about whether you still care. They may want to test whether they still have access to you. They may attempt to hoover you back into the relationship. They may become unusually affectionate. They may bring back old memories. They may provoke you. They may promise they've changed, or they may genuinely want to reconnect. But you don't have to guess based on one message. Watch the pattern. Watch their behavior. Watch how they respond to boundaries. Watch whether they accept responsibility. Watch whether the change lasts. Because someone coming back isn't necessarily the conclusion of the story. Sometimes, it's the beginning of another cycle, and sometimes, it's an opportunity for you to realize just how much you've already changed. You no longer have to chase. You no longer have to convince. You no longer have to prove your worth. And you don't have to reopen a door simply because someone has knocked on it again. The question isn't, will the narcissist come back? The question is, if they do come back, will I still be willing to accept the same relationship? If this video helped you understand something you've experienced, subscribe to the channel for more videos about narcissistic relationships, emotional manipulation, boundaries, healing, and relationship psychology. And watch the next video in this series, where we'll look at what narcissists do when they realize you're really done. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do isn't waiting for someone to come back. It's becoming someone who no longer needs them to.